Well, all right. Thanks for joining me again, Thomas Kissinger. And this is going to be How Wide Are Heaven's Doors? This is number 5. We're reading from the little booklet from my good friend George Saris, The Biblical Case for Ultimate Restoration. And yes, there is a biblical case for ultimate restoration. And how magnificent it is. Let's pick up where we left off, and he is now touching on the rich man and Lazarus. This is so misunderstood by most people. And I've heard a few different takes on this, but the important thing to know is that beyond a shadow of a doubt, this story is not a story about God burning someone in hell forever and ever. It is most assuredly 100% a parable. We're told in Matthew 13:34 that every time that Jesus spoke before the multitudes, he did so in a parable. And without a parable, he did not speak to the multitudes. So it is a parable. And as I said, I've heard a few different takes on it, but let's just read George's comments on it here. The rich man and Lazarus. Another of the passages most often said to support the idea that the Bible teaches endless punishment is the parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16. Most Bible versions say that the rich man is in hell. He's described as being in torment and agony in this fire. A great chasm has been fixed between the rich man and Lazarus, and those who want to cross over that chasm cannot. That sounds pretty convincing. However, if we take a closer look at the passage, a few things bring that interpretation into question. First of all, the rich man was not in hell. He was in Hades, okay? That's the Greek word behind that English word. And Revelation 20:13 specifically says that Hades will one day give up the dead who are in it. Second, this is a parable, a fictional story designed to teach a spiritual truth. What Jesus did was similar to what a modern speaker would do when making reference to a book like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. He could clearly point out some very important truths about life in this world without putting his stamp of approval on the existence of talking animals in another world. The audience for this parable was made up of tax collectors and sinners who were spiritually poor and recognized their need for God, and Pharisees and teachers of the law who were materially rich and had deceived themselves into thinking they were favored by God. Like the rich man in the parable, many of those religious leaders were actually clothed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. The point of the parable was that those rich religious leaders wouldn't repent even if one were to rise from the dead. Third, the parable was told before the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. Neither Abraham nor the rich man nor Lazarus could do anything to make it possible to go from one side of the chasm to the other. That was the purpose of Jesus' death and resurrection. Christ bridged the chasm. So I've touched on this parable before, and as I've said, there are a few different takes on it, okay? I've heard it said that the rich man represents Judah of the day, and that Lazarus represents the Gentiles or the nations or Israel, the northern kingdom. I've also heard some people say they believe that Lazarus represents Jesus Christ. Well, hey, like I said, few different versions of it, but the important thing is this, first and foremost, is a parable. Every time Jesus opened his mouth before the multitudes, he did so in parables. It's not a literal story about God burning someone forever and ever in literal fire in hell. It's just not. So that is the good news about it, that it is a parable, and we need to understand it and apply ourselves to see what the Lord is really talking about. So, going on a little bit further, now George touches on Gehenna. This is another Greek word that has been translated into the English word hell. And it really should not have been translated into the English word hell, and so it has caused a lot of confusion. Gehenna. It's often said that Jesus spoke of hell more often than any of the other New Testament writers. That claim is actually true, but it's also not true. The claim is based on the number of times Jesus used the Greek word Gehenna, the term most commonly translated as hell in modern versions of the Bible. Gehenna is used 12 times in the New Testament, and 11 of those times it's used by Jesus himself. The other use is in the book of James. So if we're looking at how many times Jesus used the word that's translated hell in Bible translations, compared to how many times others in the New Testament use that same word, we'd be correct in saying that Jesus spoke of hell more often than anyone else. However, the real issue is not how many times Jesus used a particular word. The real issue is what Jesus meant when he used it, and what his listeners understood when they heard it. What comes to your mind when you hear the word Auschwitz? In the future, it's possible that the word will take on a more metaphorical meaning. But right now, while the actual place still exists as a museum and in the memories of some who knew it firsthand, it reminds us of the repulsion, shame, and horrible deaths experienced by those who suffered in Nazi concentration camps in World War II. Like Auschwitz in our day, the Gehenna that Jesus spoke of was an actual place that people could visit. It had been associated with child sacrifice in the past and was then most likely used as the common dump of the city. The corpses of the worst criminals were flung into it unburied. Its stench was stifling. Fires were lit to purify the contaminated air, and it spoke to Jesus and his listeners of repulsion, shame, and horrible death. Instead of experiencing honor like their ancestors whose bodies were treated reverently when they died, those cast into Gehenna would experience the immense dishonor associated with those whose bodies had been disposed of in a dump to become an object of scorn for the masses. In an honor-shame culture like that in the ancient Near East, that was a fate worse than death. Solomon expressed very well the thought that would be in the minds of the first century Jewish leaders who listened to Jesus. Here's the quote: "A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he." Gehenna was definitely a reference to God's judgment, but it was a judgment on earth. So, this word Gehenna is among others that we need to study that I talk about all the time, like Olam, Sheol, Ion, Ionios, Hades, Gehenna, and Tartaruo. And Gehenna was and is an actual place on this earth. It was the dump outside of the city in Jesus' day. And Jesus alluded to this place when he was speaking to specifically the pious religious leaders of his day. And he warned them that unless they repented, that their lives would become worthless and they would end up in Gehenna. And you know, it really happened because Rome came in around 69 to 70 AD and destroyed Jerusalem, and the bodies were piled up into Gehenna. So it was a prophecy that came true. And also, I do believe that Gehenna, when used by Jesus, had a metaphorical meaning in the sense that there are things in our lives that are only fit for the garbage dump. They're wood, hay, and stubble. They are carnal. They're not like the Lord, and they're fit to go to the fires of God. So in that sense, yes, things that are in our lives that are not like God, wood, hay, and stubble, they are destined to go to the fire. Because God is a consuming fire, and in a metaphorical sense, that's what Jesus was alluding to when he spoke of Gehenna. So enough for now, and we'll pick up again next time.